So, you intend to engage in a sexual relationship with your fellow anchor, Ted Stevenson? Carol's response was unequivocal. I've already told you that I'm going to go off and have my little affair with Ted Stevenson, and there's nothing you can do about it. But this time, instead of a scene of Carol talking to me in our room, her voice came through on a video I was shooting on my phone in the green room. And as with my father, the scene went from two figures entwined in the darkness to a clear image of a barely clothed Carol dropping to her knees and beginning to undress the unmistakable figure of Ted Stevenson. The stage froze on the erotic scenes, and the voiceover returned for the last time. If your spouse left the house at 10 p.m., would you worry? Not at all, because all I need to do is tune into the local news to know her whereabouts. My wife, Carol Martin, co-hosts the nightly news at a prominent TV station in Birmingham. She's not only stunning but also incredibly intelligent, and there's speculation among many astute observers that her next career move might take her to a major media market like Atlanta or Chicago. Rumors even suggest she could receive an offer from a New York channel, the pinnacle for a news anchor. By the way, I'm Tom Bailey, and Carol retains her maiden name for her professional persona, a common practice among female broadcasters aiming to maintain a boundary between their personal and work lives. You can probably tell how proud I am of her and how fortunate I feel to be married to her. We first crossed paths while attending the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. Carol was pursuing a degree in broadcasting, while I focused on marketing. We met at a fraternity party during our freshman year, and I was immediately captivated. She was tall, blonde, and had all the right curves. As for me, I'm outgoing, but I wasn't a star athlete destined for campus fame. And for some reason, nobody ever suggested I should model for GQ magazine. Yet, something clicked between us, and we soon became a couple. I won't sugarcoat it and claim everything was smooth sailing. We had our fair share of arguments and even split up for a couple of weeks once. But by the second weekend, I was consumed with longing for her and regret for letting our disagreements come between us. Eventually, I found myself sprinting across campus to her dorm, hoping for reconciliation. Halfway there, I spotted her running towards me. If there had been a camera present, it would have captured the cinematic moment as we embraced, tears streaming down our faces, promising never to part again. We were, as they say, head over heels in love. By our senior year, we were engaged. Although we were already living together in a modest off-campus apartment, we wisely waited until after graduation to tie the knot. Besides, Carol wanted a grand wedding, and her family had the means to make it happen. I was pragmatic enough to go along with her plan, so we exchanged vows at the Canterbury Chapel on campus in May, just a week after receiving our diplomas. Carol landed a job as a weekend weather anchor at a local TV station in Huntsville, which, while not prestigious, was a foot in the door in the competitive world of broadcasting. She seized every opportunity to advance, transitioning to reporting on air after 6 months and eventually securing a full-time position. I, on the other hand, secured a modest role at a local advertising agency, juggling responsibilities as both an account representative and copywriter. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided valuable experience and was certainly better than being unemployed. Fortunately, Carol's career trajectory was swift. By the end of the year, she was offered a reporting position at the largest station in Mobile. Her charm and talent caught the eye of the station's management, and we relocated to the Gulf Coast. I had no qualms about playing second fiddle in our relationship. I understood the dynamics from the moment Carol landed her first on-air job, and my ego was secure enough to support her career. Besides, by the time we moved to Mobile, she was earning more than I was, which certainly didn't hurt. The station management in Mobile was well connected with local advertising agencies, and with their help, I managed to get a job with one of the big firms in the city. The people there were pleasant, and I fit in without difficulty. Carol, meanwhile, was doing even better. She joined the station as a reporter, but when a vacancy arose, she was given the chance to be a weekend newscaster. People loved her, and the ratings for her newscast began to steadily increase. Soon, she moved on to the coveted position of nightly news co-host. If viewers loved her as a presenter, they went into a frenzy when she announced on air that she was expecting a baby. They followed her in ever-increasing numbers through every stage of her pregnancy, and when our daughter, Susan, was born, the birth became news in its own way. While our beauty was growing and developing, the station used the opportunity to produce a documentary series about the challenges faced by a mother of a newborn baby returning to work, which won a regional Emmy Award. Given the success Carol was enjoying, it was no surprise that WXY, a top station in Birmingham, called and offered her a co-host position. We had grown accustomed to the relaxed pace of life on the Gulf Coast in Mobile, and we were sad to say goodbye. I had made real friends at the agency where I worked, and I was truly sorry to have to leave them. But Birmingham beckoned, and we couldn't help thinking that if Carol did well there, even greater things were ahead of us. So we sold our cozy little house, packed our bags, and headed for the big city. Some might scoff at calling Birmingham a big city, but with a population of 1.2 million and the 40th largest media market in the country, Pittsburgh South was a major step up for Carol, especially in the broadcast media arena. After being so comfortable and mobile, I was cautious about moving to Birmingham, but there was no need to worry. Armed with recommendations from my friends in Mobile and with the help of Birmingham Station. End of text, as the last sentence is incomplete. I was able to find a great job at the city's second largest advertising agency. In fact, I can't say enough good things about the station's management. They hooked us up with a knowledgeable real estate agent who helped us find a great house in the suburb of Hoover. She also helped us find a great daycare for baby Susan. All in all, the move went much easier than I expected, and we settled into our new life quickly and painlessly. I have to tell you a little about our daily routine because being the husband of a television journalist is not a normal way of life. I got up in the morning, made breakfast, and went to work, leaving Carol and Susan to sleep. Carol would stay in bed as long as Susan would let her sleep and then get up and spend the morning with her daughter. After lunch, Carol would take Susan to Mrs. Alsop's house. Mrs. Alsop was a sweet woman who took care of Susan and the other two children as well as her own daughter. She had experience in elementary school, so in addition to playing games, she introduced her charges to some of the concepts they might encounter in kindergarten and first grade. I would pick Susan up from work, bring her home, and cook dinner for us, including what could be saved so Carol could eat when she got home. After dinner, I would bathe Susan and read to her until it was time to put her to bed. Then I would read or watch TV until Carol finally came home. Often she had to wake me up on the couch where I had fallen asleep. As for Carol, after leaving Susan with Mrs. Alsop, she would go to the station and arrive at 3 o'clock to begin preparations for the evening news. Then, while the news was on, Carol would go for makeup and one last check before the 6 o'clock broadcast. She and fellow anchor Ted Stevenson would get ready for the local news hour. After they finished, they'd have a light snack. They never ate closer to airtime to avoid embarrassing burps and regurgitations and get ready for the 10 p.m. newscast. Normally, Carol and Ted took turns on the air at 10 p.m. Since the late news lasts only 30 minutes, only one anchor is needed. But lately, Don Sanchez, the news director, has been doing postmortems after the late newscasts, and Carol and Ted have had to stay late to analyze their performances and find ways to improve. Local news programs bring a lot of money to TV stations. Stations keep all the advertising revenue, and the station with the highest rating gets a premium. So competition is fierce. The higher the rating, the higher the premium, so stations are constantly looking for ways to increase their audience share. Being in the advertising business, I could understand why the station put so much emphasis on boosting ratings. But as a husband, I also felt the lack of time alone with Carol. Truth be told, with Carol working evenings and me working afternoons, it was always a challenge to find time for just the two of us, especially after Susan was born. Sure, we usually had weekends off, but we tried to find some time during the week as well. But lately, those evening meetings have become less and less frequent, especially after Don Sanchez instituted late-night autopsies. Even weekends have become less frequent as Carol has made more public appearances showing the flag for the station. With rare opportunities for intimacy, it seemed that Carol and I lived more as neighbors than as husband and wife, as friends rather than lovers, because our schedules didn't coincide. I rarely found an opportunity to discuss the situation with her, and she seemed reluctant to talk about it with me. I suppose because there were no easy answers. Even though I wasn't happy with the situation, I didn't want to bring it up because I knew what I was getting into when I married Carol. We discussed the timeline and difficulties of marriage with the TV host H, and I agreed to everything. Moreover, we had friends from college who were struggling with the opposite situation, husbands often traveling and working long hours with little time for family. If I were in that situation, I would turn to Carol for support and understanding, so I didn't want to be hypocritical. Besides, I reminded myself, Carol made a lot more money than I did, which made our lives a lot easier. Still, money wasn't everything. It got to the point where I couldn't keep my frustration to myself any longer. So one day at lunch, I laid it all out to Lou Faraday, the media director at our agency. Lou was only a couple of years older than me, was married to a beautiful woman named Terry, and had a little daughter a little older than Susan. Given that we had so much in common, it was no surprise that he became my best friend at work and someone I felt comfortable turning to for advice. So the day he told me about how happy he and Terry were, I instinctively said, "Damn, I wish I had what you have." "Looks like trouble in paradise, buddy," he said. "What's going on?" Then it all came pouring out, surprising me with how bad I felt. "I'm married to one of the finest women on television," I grumbled, "and I don't see her any more often than I see her fans on the news." Lou shook his head sympathetically. "Damn, Tom, this sucks. Can't you go on vacation sometime? Or at least a long weekend? I bet your folks would love to keep Susan with them." "I thought about it," I said, "but Carol says Don Sanchez keeps pushing Ted and her to get the ratings up. They're his best viewers, and he's afraid their absence will lead to some ratings drop that they can't make up for." "Look," Lou replied, "I've known Don Sanchez for quite some time. He's a talented news director and eager to succeed, but he's also a decent man. Maybe you should talk to him and see if there's anything he can do to give you and Carol some time together." "I don't know, Lou," I sighed. "I think Carol would kill me if she found out I'd contacted her boss." "She doesn't need to know," Lou replied. "Don's coming to the agency tomorrow to hear a presentation on the new viral video campaign we're working on. You know him well enough, I bet you can snatch a few minutes to talk to him after we're done." "I don't want to ruin your mood, Lou," I said. "My personal problems don't belong in the office." "Don't be silly, this is just a preliminary meeting. Don wanted to see how we were progressing with the concept, and we invited him to stop by. This will be a great opportunity for you to pull him aside and talk about you and Carol." I was still wary, but I couldn't think of anything better to do. My resolve was strengthened that evening when Carol arrived even later than usual. She didn't even bother to wake me up on the couch where I had dozed off waiting for her. Instead, I woke up on the couch in the middle of the night to find the TV off and a wet pillow where I had drooled in my sleep. I dragged myself upstairs, undressed, and climbed into bed next to her sleeping figure. I thought, now I won't even get a chance to kiss her goodnight. When I got to the office the next day, I was determined to do something to try to change the pattern our lives had become. I kept my eyes on the conference room where Don Sanchez was meeting with Lou and a few of his guys. As their meeting began to dissolve, I poked my head through the door and waved at Don. He was clearly in a good mood. "Hey Tom, how's my favorite news anchor husband doing?" he shouted to me. "Hey Don, it's good to see you. Listen, do you have a couple of minutes?" I asked. "Sure, what's on your mind?" he asked cheerfully. I decided to take it easy. "Hey, you need to give Carol a break. You're working her too hard," I said, frowning. But he took me seriously, and a look of concern appeared on his face. "Did she complain?" he asked quickly. "No, she likes it," I replied. "I'm the one who suffers. I don't see her anymore." He relaxed. "Oh well, you knew she had a dangerous job when you married her," he joked. He could see that he was relieved that his star wasn't upset. Sure, I agreed. But all these special appearances and post-show autopsies really cut into her and my alone time. I tried to soften my complaint with a wink. Okay, he snapped back. We've probably overdone the showing the flag thing. I'll see if we can't lighten the schedule. And don't worry about the autopsies, we haven't done one since the last ratings came out. Have you seen how much we're outranking the competition? Station management is ecstatic. Speaking of leadership, he continued, I've got to get back there for my next meeting. It was good to see you. Keep pleasing your bride with those words. He patted me on the back, turned, and headed for the door, leaving me standing in his office. Back at my desk, all I could think about was when the last set of ratings came out. I checked my computer. Our agency is a subscriber and verified that the last rating had been published a whole month ago. If Dawn hadn't performed an autopsy in a month, what was Carol doing all those nights when she got home from work so late? That question shook me to the core. Maybe it was because I was already unhappy with our relationship, but the first thought that came to me was, she's having an affair. As soon as I thought about it, I realized I was wrong. Carol loved me, and although the relationship was a bit strained, she wouldn't do anything that would jeopardize our marriage. Besides, there were plenty of other perfectly reasonable reasons why she might have stayed away like that. Maybe she just wanted to unwind a little, maybe stop in for a late-night snack, maybe she had fallen behind on fan mail and was trying to catch up. There were tons of reasons she could have been late, so why didn't that make me feel better? At that moment, Lou poked his head through the door. Hey, I saw you talking to Dawn. Did he give you any relief? I'm not sure, Lou. I guess I won't know until I talk to Carol, I said. He gave me a perplexed look, but when I didn't say anything else, turned to leave. Okay, buddy, let me know if there's anything I can do. For the rest of the day, I was like a zombie. I went about my business. Anyone who passed by my office would have thought I was working hard, but I couldn't concentrate on any of my projects. My thoughts kept returning to what Dawn had said. I tried to remember exactly what Carol had said when I asked her about the late hours. Most of all, I was thinking about what I was going to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her and demand an explanation, but no sooner had I chosen that option than another part of me thought about how stupid I'd look if the explanation turned out to be completely innocent. Accusing her of having an affair certainly wouldn't improve my relationship with Carol. I knew, and as I rationalized my fears, another voice in my head started calling me a wuss for not asserting myself and demanding the truth. By the time I left work to pick up Susan, I was no closer to solving the problem than I had been before. The only silver lining was that I now had an active, demanding 4-year-old in my arms, and being her daddy took up almost all of my attention and energy for the next few hours. Perhaps she sensed my mood because she was unusually clingy that evening and didn't want me to stop reading to her in bed. Finally, she fell asleep as I tiptoed out of the room. I looked back at her sleeping, innocent face and was surprised to find tears welling up in my eyes. How sad it would be if her mom and dad were getting a divorce. Emotionally exhausted, I went back to my room and sat down in front of the TV. At that moment, I realized that I didn't have the energy for confrontation. For a whole hour, I watched some pointless police drama, but after that, I couldn't remember anything about the plot. Then, the news came on, and I watched my beautiful wife recount the day's events. Looking at her carefully made-up face during the talking head footage, I remembered how I had been so enamored with her all those years in college. Of course, this bright, beautiful woman wouldn't cheat on me. It was well past midnight when I heard her car pull into the driveway, and she got out of the garage. When she saw me, she looked surprised. "Oh, I didn't realize you were still up," she said. I got up from the couch, walked over to her, and hugged her. "I just wanted to see you. I've missed you." "You're awfully late tonight," I said. She gave me a quick kiss and pulled away to bend over and take off her shoes. "Yeah, sorry about that. Don held us up again because of one of his damn autopsies," she said. "I'm very tired, dear. I'm going to head to bed without waiting for me," she added as she turned and headed up the stairs. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark. Oh God, I thought, she just lied to me once again. The argument between the warring parties raged in my head. Maybe she wasn't lying. Maybe Don really did call for another screening session. That doesn't make any sense. Don told you today that he hasn't held a session in a month, and after you brought it up, he certainly wouldn't call a special session today. I didn't want to believe that my wife was cheating on me, but I also didn't want to be an unwitting cuckold who buried his head in the sand rather than face the truth. What was the truth? When I went up to the bedroom, Carol was sound asleep. I lay down beside her, but sleep wouldn't come to me. The next day, I stopped by Lou's office and asked him to have lunch with me. When he looked up at me, he must have seen something in my face that stopped him from his usual witticisms. And Lou, I added, please plan on a long lunch. Now he looked at me very seriously, but only nodded and said, sure thing, buddy. I dropped by his office around 11:15 and suggested we have lunch at a place a couple of miles from the office where we were unlikely to see anyone else from work. We drove to the restaurant in silence. I didn't want to get into a conversation, and Lou realized I wasn't interested in small talk. When we ordered our lunches, I hesitated for a moment, not knowing where to begin. He looked at me sympathetically and said, it's Carol, isn't it? His comment was like cauterizing a boil, and all the unpleasant, contagious stuff seemed to pour out of me. He listened silently, letting me spill out all my fears and insecurities. When I eventually ran out, he shook his head. Damn, I never would have believed it. I thought you and Carol had the happiest marriage in the world. Me too, Lou, me too, I nodded sadly. So what are you going to do? He asked. His simple question seemed to crystallize my thoughts. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit there and agonize anymore. Lou, I said, the only thing I can think of is to go to the station and see for myself what's going on there. If I'm wrong and everything is perfectly innocent, hopefully, I'll be able to sneak out of there undetected, and Carol will never know what an insecure idiot I've been. What if you're right? Asked Lou quietly. I don't know, Lou, but at least I'll know where I stand. It's better than the agony I'm going through right now. What about Susan? He asked. I've already thought of that, I told him. When we get back from lunch, I'll call Mrs. Alsop and ask if she can keep Susan late tonight. She's already offered to do that, so hopefully, there won't be a problem. We finished lunch and headed back to the office. I was still distraught, but at least I had a plan of what to do to resolve the situation. I guess even those condemned to death feel some relief when the day of execution finally arrives. Mrs. Alsop said she would be glad to help, but asked me not to stay too long. Please be back no later than 11 o'clock, she told me. I have to start work first thing in the morning. It didn't give me much time to see anything, but it was the best. I could go, so I promised. After work, I drove again to Mrs. Alsop's house to inform Susan of the change of plans. At first, my girl wept when she realized I wasn't coming to pick her up, but Mrs. Alsop came to the rescue. We're having a pizza party, Susan, she told her, and Susan visibly brightened at the thought. I paid Mrs. Alsop for the extra time and also gave her money to order pizza for everyone. It was the least I could do. Then I headed for the exit before Susan could get upset again. Now, the only question left was how to kill a few hours. I went home and made myself something to eat. Then I picked up my plate for half an hour before I threw the food in the trash. I should have realized that there was no way I was going to eat. I cleaned up the kitchen and started rummaging around the house, looking for a way to distract myself. The more I thought about it, the worse I felt about my plan. The news wouldn't end until 10:30. How much could happen in the next 30 minutes? Worse yet, what if Carol came straight home? She might beat me to it before I could pick up Susan and get back to the house. What would I say then? All these doubts and fears paralyzed me until I remembered the determination I'd felt at lunch with Lou. I had to do something, even if it failed. I just couldn't leave it at that. By then, it was almost 10 o'clock. My plan was to go to the station during the newscast, go in just before it ended, and see what I could find. Usually, there weren't many people at the station at this late hour, just an engineer, 2 cameramen, and a sound technician. Hopefully, there would be no other visitors, and I would be able to go unnoticed. When I got to the studio, I immediately realized my mistake. There in the hall was old J.N., the night watchman. I'd forgotten all about him. He knew me from previous visits, so there was no problem getting in, but I would have had to sign in. So much for stealth. When he saw that I had entered, he looked at me curiously. "Good evening, Mr. Bailey," he said. "Come to see the news, right?" "Yes," I said and signed the log. He looked at me with a strange sympathy. "There won't be a problem, will there?" "Oh, no, of course not," I quickly replied and walked back to the studio. What did he mean by that, I wondered. And then it hit me, he knows. Oh. I returned to the set and peeked through a gap in the blackout curtains. The news had just ended, and Carol was taking down the lavalier microphone. Then she headed toward her dressing room. I circled the studio to follow her, but to my surprise, Carol didn't go to her dressing room. She headed down the hall to the green room. The green room is where guests can wait and rest before going on the air, but the 10 o'clock news never has guests, I thought. And indeed, the whole room was plunged into darkness. When she opened the door, however, I saw that one of the table lamps inside was lit and discerned a male figure sitting in one of the chairs. Then the door closed, and no light or sound came from inside. My heart was pounding, and I didn't know what to do. The door was unlocked, and I could burst in and demand an explanation. But if it was an innocent encounter, if Don Sanchez was there, for instance, Carol would never forgive me. If I stayed outside, I'd never know what was going on. I was just about to rush inside and end the aftermath when I remembered something. There was a small window on the far side of the room that allowed station personnel to unobtrusively check on guests without disturbing them. In fact, it was Carol who had pointed it out to me when she gave me a tour of the station when we first arrived. I quickly headed in the direction where the observation window was. As I walked, I checked the time. Damn it, it was already 10:45. I would have to leave quickly to make it to Mrs. Alsop's house by 11 o'clock. I moved down the darkened hallway and saw a faint light coming through the small observation window. As I peered through it, I saw Carol clearly. I had never seen such a set of underwear in my life. She was encased in a tight embrace with a man, as if she belonged to him, which I suppose at the moment she did. I pulled out my cell phone and started taking video. The lighting was low, but the black underwear seemed to make the light on her skin much brighter. I knew what was coming next, and I wanted to end it right here and now. But as I turned and headed back toward the door, I glanced at the time. It was almost 11:55. Damn it, I had to pick up Susan. I ran down the hallway to the lobby and nodded to Joe heading for the front door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey," he said. Damn, I thought, does everyone but me know what's going on? I jumped into the car and sped toward Mrs. Alsop's house. When she let me in, I found my Susan asleep. Wrapping her in a blanket, I took her in my arms, picked up my things, and turned to leave, thanking Mrs. Alsop. She looked at me strangely and asked, "Are you all right, Mr. Bailey?" When I stared at her blankly, she said, "Your eyes only." Then did I realize that tears were streaming down my cheeks. "Oh," I said, "it's nothing. I just got something in my eye when I was getting out of the car." I thanked her again and carried Susan to the car, fastening her seatbelt. Although she was still wrapped in the blanket, I don't think she woke up as we drove home. And I know she continued to sleep as I carried her up the stairs and put her in her bed. She looked so sweet and innocent, and I was overcome with longing for the innocence I had lost tonight. I got a beer out of the fridge and sat in the darkened room, waiting. Everything was quiet. Strangely, a memory of my grandmother's death flashed through my mind. I walked into the chapel where her coffin stood and realized that the silence then was intensified by my deep sadness. I felt the same way now. When she got home, it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning. She went into the kitchen and turned on the light. When she saw my figure in the unlit room, she was surprised. "Tom, what are you doing?" I've been waiting for you, I said in an even, emotionless voice. The security guard told me you came by the studio. Is everything okay with Susan? Where is she? Mrs. Alsop held her up for me. She's upstairs in bed now. Well, if you came to the studio, why don't you stop by my place? I tried to pull myself together. This was it. I saw you tonight. I saw you go into the green room with Ted Stevens. Oh, yeah, we just had a little meeting after the news, Carol. I came to the observation window. I saw what your meeting was about. I even got a glimpse of the new set of underwear you were hiding from me. At least she had the decency to look embarrassed. Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry. Now my anger was building. Are you sorry you did it or just sorry you got caught? Tom, I'm sorry you saw us like that. I didn't want you to find out this way, she said quietly. You're going to leave me for him? She dropped to her knees in front of me and took my hands in hers. Oh, honey, don't even think like that. Of course, I'm not going to leave you. This is just my little adventure, a little fling. Maybe it will be over soon, and then everything will go back to normal. I couldn't believe my ears. It'll be over soon? You mean you're not going to stop? You're going to keep cheating on me, baby? This doesn't mean anything. This is just a chance for me to experiment a little with Ted. It won't last long. Just let me have my fun, and then I'll come back to you like I always do. I can't believe it, Carol. You're asking me to agree to be a cuckold while you two entertain each other whenever you want. How could you think I would agree to that? She stood up and stepped back to look at me. Her voice was quiet and had lost all its warmth. Tom, you really don't have a say. I'm your husband, for heaven's sake. If you don't stop this, I'll have no choice but to file for divorce, she looked at me coldly. I really don't think it's in your best interest, Tom. Her calm demeanor made me even angrier. I wanted her to show some remorse, to apologize, or at least acknowledge the pain I was feeling. Instead, she talked me into accepting her behavior and pretending that nothing was going on. I couldn't believe it. Given your actions today, I will decide for myself what is in my best interest. And I can tell you that I'm not going to stand for it. She crossed her arms over her chest and spoke to me as if she were lecturing a delinquent. Child. Tom, listen to me. If you file for divorce, you're going to lose. You'll lose your daughter because the court will award custody of Susan to me. You'll only get to see her a couple of weekends a month, plus your birthday and some holidays. No matter how we divide our assets, I'll get the house because I'll be raising Susan. And of course, even if there's no alimony, you'll still pay child support. Wait a minute. I shouted, you're the one committing adultery, Tom. This is a no-fault state. The court doesn't care who did what to whom. It only cares about the welfare of the children. In the case of a 4-year-old girl, the mother always gets custody. She paused to catch her breath, then continued, if you don't believe me, find a lawyer and ask him. You'll realize I know what I'm talking about. Her tone softened. You don't want this to happen, Tom. I don't want it to happen either. I want our family to stay together. This little adventure I've been up to shouldn't concern us. Just think about it. As I sat leaning back in my chair, she came over and kissed the top of my head. Just think about it, Tom. With those words, she turned and headed up the stairs. I don't know exactly how long I sat like that. Thoughts flashed through my mind, and each of them evoked a different emotion: anger, loss, bewilderment, sadness, perplexity, fear, rage, frustration. I felt like I had to make some plans, had to do something, but had absolutely no idea what. That Carol would cheat on me was unthinkable. That she would suggest continuing the affair was so far beyond my imagination that I felt paralyzed. I finally got to my feet and dragged myself up the stairs, exhausted from the roller coaster of events and emotions I had experienced tonight. I fell heavily into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. Even though I was exhausted, my body automatically woke up at 6 o'clock the next morning. Mechanically, I showered, shaved, and dressed. Wild thoughts flashed through my mind: run away and hide, or wake Carol and shake her, or kidnap Susan, or just go to bed and never get up again. But when I went into Susan's room to look at her sleeping figure, I realized that for her sake, I had to hold myself together. If I did something stupid, I would be in trouble and most likely lose all chance of keeping my beautiful daughter. I knew I had to put her first, to be strong for her sake. So, I did my morning chores and headed to the office as I did every day. I was able to work on autopilot and complete all the tasks necessary to get to work. But as soon as I arrived and sat down at my desk, all reflexes left me, and I put my head down on my desk in a daze. "Tom, it's Lou. Are you okay?" When I didn't answer, he walked into my office and closed the door behind him. "What's wrong?" he asked worriedly, and I told him every sordid detail of last night's conversation that I could remember. Once I started, I couldn't stop. Lou just sat there with a stunned expression on his face. He was shocked when I told him about what I'd seen in the green room, but he was taken aback by Carol's attitude toward her cheating. "Damn it," he said. "She has the nerve to ask you to just sit there and put up with her cheating." When I finally finished, he sat up and looked me in the eye. "Look," he said, "Carol has changed. I don't know what served it up. Maybe success has turned her head, but she's no longer the same woman I met when you moved here. And that means you have to change your attitude toward her. You can no longer assume that she has your best interests at heart. It's up to you to look out for yourself now, buddy." He stood up. "The first thing you should do is consult an attorney. I can't believe she's getting away with this. You can't rely on her word. You need to find out for yourself." "Hell, Lou," I replied, "I don't know any lawyers in Birmingham." "That's where I come in handy," he smiled. "My college roommate became a lawyer, and he practices here in town. I bet he'd see you today if I asked him to. Let me go make a phone call." With those words, he left. A moment later, he returned to my office holding a piece of paper. "You must like these old school friends," he exclaimed. "You have an appointment for 1 p.m. today. Here's his name and address. He's experienced. You're a lifesaver, Lou. At least it gives me something to do." "No problem, buddy. After you meet him, come back and tell me what he said." The meeting with the lawyer did not go as I had hoped. He shook my hand and invited me into his office, then asked me to tell my story. I gave him the highlights and then got to what I really wanted to know: what are my options in a divorce, Tom? He said there used to be a good guy and a bad guy in every breakup. The court would hear the two sides argue and then apportion blame. It was a no-win situation, he said. She said it was impossible to determine who was right and who was at fault. Trials lasted too long. They were a drag on the judicial system. Eventually, someone came up with the idea of no fault. This meant that unless a crime had been committed, the court didn't have to worry about who did what to whom. All it had to do was decide on the equitable division of marital property and the welfare of minor children. Things just got a lot simpler. "Okay," I said, "but what does that mean for me?" He sighed. "In a nutshell, that means that what Carol told you is correct. Unless she turns out to be an unfit mother, using drugs, criminally neglectful, and the like, the court will give her custody of your daughter. We can try to get broad visitation rights, but Susan will live with Carol, and Carol will determine how often you will see your daughter. And even though Carol makes more money than you will still have to contribute to the cost of raising your daughter in the form of child support." "What about the house?" I asked him. He shook his head. "Well, you both bought the house, so it's joint property to be divided between you. But the court's primary concern is the welfare of the child, and the court doesn't like children being unnecessarily removed from the house. So the most likely outcome is that Carol will remain living in the house until Susan turns 18. After that, you both can put the house up for sale and divide the equity according to the final property division judgment. But for the next 14 years, the house will belong to her." But in a few years, she'll probably move on to another media market, I objected, then you can sell the house. But until that happens, it stays put. I sat back and shook my head. Damn it, she knew exactly what she was talking about. I'm screwed. I'm sorry, he said to me as we shook hands. It's not always fair, but that's the law. As I drove back to the office, I felt like I had been sent to purgatory. I couldn't understand what sin I had committed, but I was sure I was being punished. Lou was eagerly awaiting my return, but with the look on my face, he already knew how it was going to end, and I didn't need to say anything. Damn it, Lou, I said. It's just not fair. She's put me in a predicament, and there's nothing I can do about it. She can act like and unless I want to give up my daughter and my home, I'm going to have to suck it up and put up with it. I started pacing around the office. I'm beginning to understand why some men destroy their wives. Don't even joke about that, Tom, Lou said quickly. I know you want to cut her out of your life, but if something happens to her, I don't want to have to testify that you made threats here, okay? Okay, I agreed. I can't and would never do anything like that. It's just that I feel like an ancient mariner, and she feels like an albatross around my neck. As I passed the window in my office, I looked out and groaned. Across the street was a billboard that had just gone up. It had a huge picture of Carol and Ted Stevenson staring at me with the caption, Birmingham's choice for the 6 o'clock news. See? I said to Lou, pointing at the billboard. I can't get away from her, even here. Lou walked over and looked at the new sign. WXYZ definitely likes the ratings these two are getting. Then a strange expression came over his face. Interesting, he muttered. Then he turned to me. How desperate are you to find a way out of this trap you've fallen into? Not desperate enough to resort to violence, I said. No, we're not going to commit a crime, at least I don't think so. But I have an idea that might solve your problem. The two of us sat and talked for the next hour. Several times I told him that he was crazy and that we could never do it. I pointed out to him that even if we did, it wouldn't work out. I reminded him that if things went badly, Carol would demand a divorce from me and would be vindictive as hell. To all of this, Lou kept asking, so, how much worse off will you be than you are now? Thinking about it, I realized two things. First, I was stuck in a position that I absolutely could not bear, at least not for long. Second, I really had no choice but to do something truly desperate. Okay, Lou, I'm in. Perhaps as I left the office in the afternoon, my words sounded quite decisive, but as I drove to Mrs. Alsop's house to pick up Susan, I was overcome with doubt. I risked losing my daughter if I tried what Lou was suggesting. Wouldn't I be better off just swallowing my pride and living as a cuckold? Doing nothing was the easiest solution, no doubt about it. My thoughts and my stomach continued to churn as I brought Susan home and began to prepare dinner. For once, I'd left the TV off. I didn't think I could watch Susan and Ted interacting on the set, especially after what I'd seen a few nights before. Just as I was getting Susan ready for bed, I was surprised to hear Carol's car pull up. I knew it wasn't her turn to anchor the 10 o'clock news, but I assumed she'd stay to be with Ted. However, she came through the door, picked Susan up in her arms, and carried her delighted daughter to bed. I could hear the two of them laughing and giggling as Carol read story after story. Tears came to my eyes. This was what it was like in our house before everything went wrong. When Carol finally came downstairs, I looked up and said sincerely, "That was very nice of you. She misses you very much, especially before bedtime." "I know," she said, "and I missed her too." I wondered if she was having second thoughts about the new lifestyle she'd chosen, but all those hopes were quickly dashed in the next minute. The look on Carol's face now reminded me of a mother about to lecture her child on an unpleasant subject. "Tom, I wanted to come home early today so I could tell you about what's planned for next week." She took a deep breath and then continued, "I'm taking a vacation for next week. I've talked to Don Sanchez, and he's fine with it. What's more, he advised me to take some time off. He says our ratings are so high that we can afford it." I was pleasantly surprised. A week together might be just what we needed to rebuild our marriage. I'll have to check with my boss tomorrow, but I think I can get some time off, I said. What do you mean? She sighed. You're not participating, Tom. Ted and I are going away alone. We're tired of having to sneak around. This is a chance for us to enjoy each other without worrying about anything else. I was stunned. I just sat there staring at her, not believing what I was hearing. I've already cleared it with Mrs. Alsop. She'll keep Susan all day next week. All you have to do is drop her off on your way to work and pick her up at the usual time. She reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper, which she held out to me. Here's all the information about where I'll be staying if you need to contact me. I'm sure Susan will be fine, but just in case. We're leaving on Friday. Maybe you can take Susan to the park for the weekend. She loves that. We'll be back on Sunday, and things will go back to a normal schedule. She looked at me a little unsure. I still hadn't said anything. Okay, if you don't have any questions, I'm going to bed early tonight. Then, to my utter amazement, she came over and kissed me on the top of my head like I was a little kid. Thanks for taking care of everything, honey, she said, and headed up the stairs. Oh my God, I thought, this has to be the most humiliating experience of my life. I was literally shaking with anger. There was no doubt in my mind. I had to do something to regain my manhood. Lou's crazy plan suddenly seemed like the best option. Friday, I got off work early. I wanted to be sure to see Carol before she left on her little trip with Ted Stevenson. I had already made arrangements with Mrs. Alsop to keep Susan overnight. If there was any yelling or swearing, I didn't want Susan to be exposed to it. I had already checked Carol's closet in the morning and found her suitcases, so I knew she would have to come home to pack. That would give me the opportunity one needed. When her car pulled into the driveway, I settled into my favorite chair in the living room and waited for her to come in. She opened the door and headed straight for me. She knew I was home because she'd seen my car in the garage. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Is Susan okay?" "She's fine," I said soothingly. "She's at Mrs. Alsop's." "Then why are you here?" she asked again. "I wanted to make another attempt to convince you not to go away with Ted this week," I told her. She put her hands on her hips in frustration. "I've already told you I'm going to go off and have my little affair with Ted Stevenson, and there's nothing you can do about it. As soon as we get back, it'll be over, and everything will go back to normal. You just have to be patient and give me a chance to get it out of my head." "But Carol," I whined, "what about our wedding vows? What about leaving everyone else behind? Those wedding vows were written in another time and place." "No one believes all that nonsense anymore," she said with irritation. "But you're talking about adultery," I insisted. "I don't want you to dishonor our marriage." Her impatience and irritation were clearly growing. "Tom, we don't need to discuss this anymore. If I want to go and entertain Ted Stevenson, I'll do it whether you like it or not. That's what I want to do. It has nothing to do with you and me." "But I don't want to do that." "But Carol, what about your fans? All those people who watch you every night, you know they won't approve of what you're doing. I've clearly taken it too far. I don't care what my fans think. They're just a bunch of redneck dorks. Look," she went on, "in 6 months to a year, I'll leave this provincial town and get a job in a real city where the streets don't turn down at night. In the meantime, what people here think means nothing to me. Now please stop pestering me. I've already made up my mind. I have to go and pack or I'll be late. And if you can't stand seeing me with Ted when he comes to get me, I suggest you get out of here right now." I stood up, slumping my shoulders. "I'm sorry, Carol. I'm sorry for everything." I turned around, walked out to my car, and headed to the local tavern. I was shaking, and I needed to relax. I was sipping my second beer when Lou walked through the door. "Hey, buddy," he said with a grim smile, "how'd it go?" "I don't know, Lou," I admitted. "I was too close to him. You'll have to come and see for yourself." Not until I try the same thing you did, he said firmly. After he finished his beer, we both got into my car and drove back to the house. As I expected, Carol was long gone. We walked to my room, and he sat down at the computer. When did you buy this thing? Back in the Stone Age, he asked. Nevertheless, with a few keystrokes, he was able to do what he wanted. Okay, he said, pointing at me, let's see what we've got. He pressed another key, and Carol's image appeared on the screen. We listened as Carol flatly rejected my pleas to fulfill my wedding vows and told me exactly what she planned to do with Ted Stevenson. I heard Lou mutter under his breath. Then he listened to Carol's story about her fans in the city where she works, and the look on Lou's face became jubilant. We got her, man. That's a lot better than what we were hoping for. When the playback ended, Lou pressed another button, and we watched Carol again, but this time from a different angle. The second camera is very important, Lou said. It gives more realism. When the second playback ended, he FTP'd both files to his office.